I've been trying to read this chapter all day, starting a little while ago, about 11 o'clock. It's now 8, and somehow I end up going for a walk in this town I live in and getting my face painted by a high schooler. I think it's a snowman. Looks like a snowman. Anyway, I'm super excited about this chapter because it's called Thinking in Time and Space. How do you think in time and space? So this book by Vine Deloria, it's called God is Red. It's an amazing book. So far, I've learned a lot about the American Indian movement. And this is the next chapter 4, Thinking in Time and Space. Here we go. Chapter 4, Thinking in Time and Space. The division of domestic ideologies may appear to be quite artificial to many people. Traditionally, we have been taught to define differences neither by ancestral backgrounds nor cultural attitudes, but by political persuasions. He wrote this book a while ago. We're still there. Conservative and liberal, terms that initially describe political philosophies, have taken on the aspect of being able to stand for cultural attitudes of fairly distinct content. Liberals appear to have more sympathy for humanity, while conservatives worship corporate freedom and self-help doctrines underscoring individual responsibility. This basic philosophical difference between liberals and conservatives are not fundamental. However, because both find in the idea of history a thesis by which they can validate their ideas. When the domestic ideology is divided according to American Indian and Western European immigrant, however, the fundamental difference is one of great philosophical importance. American Indians hold their lands, places, as having the highest possible meaning, and all their statements are made with this reference point in mind. Immigrants review the movement of their ancestors across the continent as a steady progression of basically good events and experiences, thereby placing history, time, in the best possible light. When one group is concerned with the philosophical problem of space, and the other with the philosophical problem of time, then the statements of either group do not make much sense when transferred from one context to the other without the proper consideration of what is taking place. Western European peoples have never learned to consider the nature of the world discerned from a spatial point of view, and the singular difficulty faces peoples of Western European heritage in making a transition from thinking in terms of time to thinking in terms of space. So the Western European heritage in making a transition from thinking in terms of time to thinking in terms of space. The very essence of Western European identity involves the assumption that time proceeds in a linear fashion. Further, it assumes that at a particular point in the unraveling of this sequence, the peoples of Western Europe become the guardians of the world. The same ideology that sparked the Crusades, the age of exploration, the age of imperialism, and the recent crusade against communism all involve the affirmation that time is peculiarly related to the destiny of the people of Western Europe, and later, of course, the United States. So walking around Fort Bragg, I have a Christmas tree parade and a bunch of trucks lit up. Reforesters were there with trees, and there's a 2,000-year-old tree slab behind where the Christmas tree is. It's nearly 2,000-year-old tree. It's huge. Can't even imagine how big it is. And there's a marker on the tree marking the different periods of time. This tree was cut down here on the west coast of Turtle Island, United States, North America, next to the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 years ago. And they marked dates along this tree. And all of them are about when the Christian church was first legalized in 313. It wasn't legalized. It was co-opted by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, the discovery of America, because nobody knew it was here. Not even the people who lived here didn't even know they were here. Anyway, totally pertains to this. Their sense of time was all about their Western European identity. And there's not one piece of information on this tree that was living here for nearly 2,000 years about the people that knew this tree before it was cut down in 1943. So I just had a real connection to the reality of what Vine Deloria is saying. So I'm going to read that paragraph again. Western European peoples have never learned to consider the nature of the world discerned from a spatial point of view. And the singular difficulty faces people of Western European heritage in making a transition from thinking in terms of time to thinking in terms of space. The very essence of Western European identity involves the assumption that time proceeds in a linear fashion. Further, it assumes that at a particular point in the unraveling of this sequence, the peoples of Western Europe become the guardians of the world. The people of Western Europe become the guardians of the world. The same ideology that sparked the Crusades, the age of exploration, the age of imperialism, and the recent crusade against communism all involve the affirmation that time is peculiarly related to the destiny of the people of Western Europe, and later, of course, the United States. The post-war generation people have never learned to consider the nature of the world discerned from a spatial point of view. And the singular difficulty faces people of Western European heritage in making a transition from thinking in terms of time to thinking in terms of space. The very essence of Western European identity involves the assumption that time proceeds in a linear fashion. Further, it assumes that at a particular point in the unraveling of this sequence, the peoples of Western Europe become the guardians of the world. The same ideology that sparked the Crusades, the age of exploration, the age of imperialism, and the recent crusade against communism all involve the affirmation that time is peculiarly related to the destiny of the people of Western Europe, and later, of course, the United States. I think I read that 3 times. The post-war generation of which we are a part has refused to accept any alteration of this fundamental premise. It is particularly revealing that the first major doctrine enunciated as an anti-communist foreign policy was that of containment. Through containment, it was believed that the spread of communism could be restricted to certain geographical areas from which no further extensions of communist ideology Sorry, I'm very distracted. It must be the snowman on my face. So, the post war generation of which we're a part has refused to accept any alteration of this fundamental principle. Is particularly revealing that the first major doctrine enunciated as an anti communist foreign policy was that of containment. Through containment, it was believed the spread of communism could be restricted to certain geographical areas from which no further extensions of communist ideologies could emanate. The anachronistic nature of this theory should have been apparent. Western political ideas came to depend on spatial restrictions of what were essentially non spatial ideas. The inherent contradiction of opposing dissimilar definitions within a single theory proved fruitless to the colonial powers in Southeast Asia, Africa, and India, and led to unjustifiable woes in Central America and military adventurism elsewhere. Without venturing further into the field of foreign affairs, it may be well to note in passing that the determination of American presidents fighting in Vietnam not to be the first to lose a war, when winning that war in any final sense would have meant total destruction of a land and the people, would seem to indicate the extent to which Western peoples, and particularly Americans, have taken the dimension of time or history as an absolute value. With our withdrawal from Southeast Asia would seem to demonstrate that in most military collisions, history is clearly negated by geography. We have seen this phenomenon before in the two classic unsuccessful attempts by Napoleon and Hitler to conquer Russia, in which the country's vast interior subdued military forces that appeared to be riding the crest of historical change. We may now be facing that phenomenon again in the Middle East. The disclaimer of colonialism in recent years has presented Western peoples with a major dilemma. Deprived of their traditional source of wealth from the underdeveloped and former colonial nations, they now have little choice but to seek ways of rechanneling their present wealth through the various forms of social organization already present domestically. A certain inertia has been achieved, perhaps unwittingly. That means a major shift in political thinking among Western peoples. The creation of wealth today is more dependent on new technology and manipulation of the tax laws than on the exploitation of untapped resources. This is not to say that exploitation of mineral and other resources will not continue, as underdeveloped nations such as those in Africa and the Middle East continue their own growth. Severe modifications of exploitation must occur. More sophisticated forms of colonialism, such as sanctions and embargoes, must be created if Western countries are not to suffer economic collapse. It is doubtful that many Americans understand the meaning of this shift from the colonial attitude. At best, it means the humanization of peoples who for centuries were considered merely producers of raw materials and consumers of those products they were required to purchase. At worst, the end of one form of colonialism means the beginning of a movement to feudalize political systems around the globe so as to stabilize the economic conditions of the more affluent nations. Either approach means that the ecological problem is not dealt with, the problem of technical dehumanization is not reduced, and the breakdown of individual and community identity is not reversed. But there can be little doubt that a major part of the Western world is now suffering from an increasingly complicated task of revitalizing institutions to prevent collapse. Revitalization has been primarily an effort to force outmoded institutions to respond to novel situations for which they were not created. If we take Toffler's future shock seriously, and there does not seem to be sufficient reason to consider it a trivial analysis, or if we recognize the logical conclusions of thinking of both Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan, we discover neither a planet of the spaceship model, not an instantaneous universe of communications linking a global village, but the disappearance of time itself as a limiting factor of our experience. In a world in which communications are clearly instantaneous and simultaneous experiences are possible, it must be spaces and places that distinguish us from one another, not time or history. The world, therefore, is not a global village so much as a series of non homogeneous pockets of identity that must eventually come into conflict because they represent different historical arrangements of emotional energy. What these concentrations of emotional energy will produce, how they will understand themselves, and what mini movements will emerge from them are among the unanswered questions of our time. If we believe that religion has a presence in human societies in any fundamental sense, then we can no longer speak of universal religions in the customary manner. Rather, we must be prepared to confront religion and religious activities in new and novel ways. The recognition that there is no homogeneous sense of time shared by all societies must certainly become apparent to us if it is not already clear. We can and must, therefore, create a new understanding of universal planetary history. Between the mini movements of activity on our local level, we will most certainly see the emergence of religious movements that appear out of time, movements that have been somehow triggered either by the influences of the places in which they have originated, or movements of restorations that seek to invoke some type of authentic religious experience to validate the identity of a small ethnic, racial, or religious group. Thus, Southern California can be the hotbed of Christian fundamentalist beliefs and at the same time support a substantial number of devil worshippers and Satanists. Both movements are disconnected from a universal passage of time and are a product of the concentration of beliefs as modified their human and natural environments. Religion has often been seen as an evolutionary process in which mankind progresses from primitive superstitions to logically perfected codes of conduct, from a multiplicity of deities to a monotheistic religion, well developed institutions, and creeds honed to philosophical purity of expression. The validity of most religious traditions is believed to be their ability to explain the cosmos, not their potential to provide a wide range of spiritual experiences. But monotheism, as Nathan Sonderbloom has pointed out, is usually the product of the political unification of a diverse society, more often than it is the result of a revelation of ultimate reality. In the Western tradition, revelation has generally been interpreted as the communication to human beings of a divine plan and release of new information and insights when the deity has perceived that mankind has reached the fullness of time and can now understand additional knowledge about the ultimate nature of our world. Thus, what has been the manifestation of deity in particular local situation is mistaken for a truth applicable to all times and the places, a truth so powerful that it must be impressed upon peoples who have no connection to the event or to the cultural complex in which it originally made sense. The recounting of the event becomes its major value, and both metaphysics and ethics are believed to be contained in the description of the event. Ultimately, the religion becomes a matter of imposing the ethical perspective derived from reprocessing the religious experience on foreign cultures and not in following whatever moral dictates might have been gleaned from the experience. The question that the so called world religions have not satisfactorily resolved is whether or not religious experience can be distilled from its original cultural context and become an abstract principle that is applicable to all peoples in different places and at different times. The persistent emergence of religious movements and the zeal with which we are pursued would seem to suggest that cultural context, time, and place are the major elements of revelation, and the content is illusory. If not illusory, it is subject to so many cultural qualifications that it is not suitable for transmission to other societies without doing severe damage to both the message of revelation and the society which receives it. American Indians and other tribal peoples did not take this path in interpreting revelations and religious experiences. The structure of their religious traditions is taken directly from the world around them, from their relationship with other forms of life. Context is therefore all important for both practice and the understanding of reality. The places where revelations were experienced were remembered and set aside as locations where through rituals and ceremonials the people could once again communicate with the spirits. Thousands of years of occupancy on their lands taught tribal peoples the sacred landscapes for which they were responsible, and gradually the structure of ceremonial reality became clear. It was not what people believed to be true that was important, but what they experienced as true. Hence, revelation was seen as a continuous process of adjustment to the natural surroundings and not as a specific message valid for all times and places. The vast majority of Indian tribal religions, therefore, have a sacred center at a particular place, be it a river, a mountain, a plateau, a valley, either or other natural feature. This center enables the people to look out along the four dimensions and locate their lands, to relate all historic events within the confines of this particular land, and to accept responsibility for it, regardless of what subsequently happens to the people. The sacred lands remain as a permanent fixture in their cultural or religious understanding. Thus, many tribes now living in Oklahoma, but formerly from the eastern United States, still hold in their hearts the sacred locations of their history, and small groups travel to obscure locations in secret to continue tribal ceremonial life. Other religions also have a sense of sacred places. The Holy Land has historically been a battlefield of three world religions, each of which has particular sacred places it cherishes. But these places are appreciated primarily for the historical significance and do not provide the sense of permanency and the rootedness that the Indian sacred places represent. European Christian shrines are often standing on the ruins of former temples and holy places of the original peoples of Europe, indicating that something of the sacred always infuses a site, regardless of the religious expression that may temporarily possess it. The ancient Chinese developed an incredibly complex system of geomancy, in order to make human habitations conform to the sacred landscape of China. But all of these expressions of human religious experiences none has so faithfully remained close to the original location and the original revelation as those of the tribal peoples of North America. The law of revelation at sacred places is often of such a personal nature as to preclude turning it into a subject of missionary activities. Thus, most Indian tribes will not reveal the location of sacred places unless they are compelled through dire circumstances to do so. But having once identified a location as having sacred properties, they will not then reveal the kinds of ceremonies that are supposed to be held there. Sacred places thus inform us of the particularity of revelation. This is not a universal message to be placed in secular or immature hands for distribution. Rather, it is as intimate as our own personal thoughts that we would never utter in profane ears. See chapter 16 for an in-depth discussion of sacred places. That's the beginning of chapter 4. It's very powerful. I'm already feeling the energy of the fight here in California for the land back movement. It's about being able to have access to sacred sites. So there's the beginning of chapter 4 of God is Red by Vine Deloria. Thinking in time and space. There's a lot. I'm going to have to think about it.